What if the greatest love of a woman's life wasn't a husband, a lover, or even someone who stayed? And what if that absence quietly shaped every decision she made, every relationship, every heartbreak, and even her final years? Audrey Hepburn was admired across the world as the embodiment of elegance and grace. To millions, she lived a life that seemed almost unreal. Fame, beauty, success, admiration at every turn. But behind that image was a story far more fragile, and far more human than anyone truly understood. And in her final chapter, she would reveal something deeply personal, something that forces us to look back at her entire life differently. Because the man she never truly got over wasn't who anyone expected. But before we get to that truth, we have to ask something uncomfortable. How much of a person's life is shaped not by love they receive, but by love they lose too early to understand? The marriage that slowly took her apart. Most people remember Audrey Hepburn in that iconic black dress, standing outside Tiffany's, radiating effortless charm. A cinematic moment frozen in time. But how many remember the private life she rarely spoke about? For 14 years, she was married to actor and director Mel Ferrer. On paper, they seemed perfectly matched, both artistic, cultured, deeply embedded in the world of film, theater, and performance. But let's pause and ask something important. When two people look perfect together from the outside, how often does that image hide an entirely different reality behind closed doors? They met in the early 1950s, introduced through mutual friends in the film industry. There was an immediate creative chemistry between them. Ferrer was experienced, confident, already established in Hollywood and European cinema. Audrey, still new to fame, was navigating a world that suddenly demanded everything from her: attention, perfection, availability, and emotional endurance. In that moment, Ferrer didn't just feel like a partner. He felt like guidance. And Audrey, still searching for stability in an unstable world, leaned into that guidance more deeply than she realized. They married in 1954. At first, it worked. Or at least, it looked like it worked. He advised her on scripts, roles, and public image. He positioned himself as both husband and protector in an industry that often consumes young stars. But here's a question worth sitting with. When does guidance stop being support and start becoming control? Over time, something shifted. Decisions that once felt shared began to feel dictated. Her career choices became filtered through his perspective. Her independence, once quietly strong, started to feel negotiated. To the world, she was one of the most beloved women alive. But inside her home, she sometimes felt like she was disappearing. And then came the pain she never fully recovered from. She wanted to be a mother. Not as a passing thought. Not as a future plan. But as something deeply emotional, almost instinctive. And yet, life did not make it easy for her. She suffered multiple miscarriages, each one leaving a deeper emotional scar than the last. One of them came after a serious fall during filming, leading to hospitalization and heartbreak that no camera ever captured. Can you imagine carrying that kind of grief, while still being expected to smile for the world? While still being Audrey Hepburn? While still being flawless? In 1960, she finally gave birth to her son, Sean. For a brief moment, everything changed. She stepped away from films. She slowed down. She tried to build something stable, something real, something she had never truly had growing up. But here's the painful truth. Even new life cannot always repair old fractures. The cracks in her marriage remained. Reports of emotional distance, jealousy, and tension continued to grow. Ferrer remained influential, but not always in ways that brought peace. And slowly, the marriage that once looked like a foundation began to feel like a cage she had to quietly survive. After 14 years, it ended. She walked away not just as a celebrity divorcee, but as someone emotionally exhausted from trying to hold something together that had already begun to fall apart long ago. But the next chapter of her life would not bring relief. It would bring a different kind of pain entirely. The love that promised peace, but delivered betrayal. By the late 1960s, Audrey Hepburn was no longer just a star. She was a global icon. So here's a question that lingers beneath the surface of her story. When someone has everything the world says should make them happy, why do they still feel the need to walk away? For Audrey, the answer wasn't fame. It was exhaustion. She wanted peace. She wanted simplicity. And above all, she wanted her son to grow up away from the constant pressure of Hollywood attention. During this transition, she met Andrea Detti while on a Mediterranean cruise. The setting itself felt like something out of a film: sunlight reflecting off water, conversations that stretched into warm evenings, and the illusion of escape from everything heavy she had carried for years. He was different from Ferrer. Younger in spirit. More spontaneous. Less controlling at first. He made her laugh again. He made life feel lighter. And after years of emotional weight, that lightness felt like salvation. Within months, they married. She moved to Rome. And for a time, she tried to believe she had finally found peace. But let's ask something here. How do you recognize the difference between peace and the calm before another storm? Because slowly, reality began to change. Detti's infidelity didn't remain hidden for long. Affairs became known. Rumors became confirmation. And confirmation became public knowledge. Imagine that experience for a moment. Leaving Hollywood to escape constant visibility, only to find your private life becoming public spectacle again. She had tried to escape the spotlight. But betrayal found her anyway. Still, she stayed longer than many expected. Why? Was it hope? Was it commitment? Or was it the quiet belief that love requires endurance, even when it hurts? She had built her identity on resilience. On staying. On trying again. But eventually, even endurance has limits. The marriage ended. And something in her shifted permanently. She became quieter about her private life. More careful. Less willing to trust easily. Not broken, but changed. And to understand why these relationships affected her so deeply, we have to go further back than marriage, fame, or heartbreak. We have to return to where it all began. The childhood that shaped everything. What if the most important relationship in your life was the one that ended before you even understood what ending meant? Audrey Hepburn's story does not begin in Hollywood. It begins in 1929, in Brussels. On the surface, her childhood had structure, education, travel, exposure to languages, a life that seemed privileged compared to many. But beneath that surface was instability that never fully healed. Her father left when she was just 6 years old. No warning. No explanation. No closure. Just absence. And here's the question that echoes through the rest of her life. What does a child become when love disappears without reason? She waited for him. She looked for him in holidays that never brought him back. She held on to the belief that absence might eventually become return. But it never did. And in that silence, something shaped itself inside her, a quiet emotional blueprint that would follow her into adulthood. The need to be chosen. The fear of abandonment. The hope that love, even when unstable, is still worth holding on to. Later in life, she would survive war, hardship, and displacement during her early years in Europe. Those experiences deepened her resilience, but they also reinforced something subtle. That love and loss often arrive together. That nothing permanent can truly be trusted. And perhaps most importantly, that even beautiful things can disappear without warning. So when we look back at Audrey Hepburn's life, her marriages, her sacrifices, her endurance, we are no longer just looking at the story of a Hollywood icon. We are looking at the life of a woman who spent decades quietly asking a question she never should have had to ask as a child. If love leaves you once, will it leave you again? And maybe that is what makes her story so haunting. Because behind the elegance, behind the grace, behind the image the world adored, there was always something deeper moving underneath. A wound. A longing. A silence that followed her from childhood into adulthood, from one relationship into the next. What does it do to a person when the first bond that should have felt safe becomes the first thing lost? And how does that shape the way they love for the rest of their life? She didn't just live a life shaped by love. She lived a life shaped by the fear of losing it. Before the fame, before the gowns, before the cameras and the awards, there was a little girl growing up in a world that was already unstable. Audrey was born into privilege, but privilege could not protect a child from emotional abandonment. Her parents' marriage collapsed early, and her father drifted out of her life at a time when children need certainty most. That absence did something invisible but lasting. It did not merely create sadness. It created a pattern, a question, a private ache that could not be explained away by wealth or status. How do you replace a father who simply is not there? How do you make sense of the space left behind? For Audrey, that early loss became part of the foundation of her life. She carried it quietly, with the kind of dignity people often mistake for emotional distance. But the heart remembers what the world tries to forget. Then came World War II. Sent to the Netherlands for safety, she found herself trapped under Nazi occupation instead. The countryside that should have offered peace became a place of fear, deprivation, and survival. The war stripped away any illusion of security. Food became scarce. Winters became brutal. Hunger was no longer an idea, it was a daily reality. Family members were arrested and executed. The air itself seemed heavy with grief. What does a girl become when childhood is replaced by famine and fear? What happens to dreams when every day is about simply making it through the next one? And yet Audrey adapted. Even then, she was not merely surviving, she was resisting. She helped the resistance by carrying messages. She performed ballet in secret to raise funds for the cause, despite malnutrition and exhaustion. Imagine the courage that required. A young woman, weakened by hunger, still insisting on beauty, movement, and purpose in a world that had turned cruel. That is not fragility. That is quiet strength. But survival does not erase emotional wounds. It transforms them. Psychologists later suggested that her father's absence may have shaped the way she connected with men as an adult. She was often drawn to older, authoritative figures, men who seemed to offer structure, safety, and stability. Men like Mel Ferrer. Men like Andrea Detti. Perhaps she was not searching for excitement at all. Perhaps she was searching for what had gone missing too early. Steadiness, protection, permanence. Was that weakness? Or was it simply the human need to fill a lifelong emptiness with someone who might finally stay? People often think of love as a cure. But what if love also becomes a mirror, reflecting old wounds back to us? Audrey's relationships were deeply human, and like many human relationships, they carried both hope and pain. Her first marriage to Mel Ferrer lasted over a decade and brought her a son, but it also revealed how complicated it is to balance devotion, career, and personal need. Later, her marriage to Andrea Detti gave her another son, yet it too ended in separation. The world saw the glamorous photographs, the public appearances, the polished surface. But the private reality was more fragile, more tender, more human. And still, she kept going. She did not become bitter in the way the world often expects broken people to become bitter. She did not harden into cynicism. Instead, she continued trying to love, even when love had already disappointed her more than once. Isn't that one of the most courageous things a person can do? To keep reaching for connection after loss has already taught them how painful that can be. The reunion that changed nothing. In the 1960s, Audrey finally tracked down her father through the Red Cross. That moment alone feels like something out of a novel. After decades of absence, after years of unanswered questions, after carrying the ache of abandonment like a second shadow, she finally had a chance to see him again. What would you expect in that moment? Tears, remorse, embraces, a conversation that would at last fill the empty space he had left behind? She found none of that. He was distant, detached, unchanged. The reunion did not restore the past. It did not mend anything. It simply confirmed what had already been quietly true for years. The connection she had hoped for was not there. The father she had imagined in her heart did not exist in reality. And there may be nothing more painful than meeting someone you have spent your whole life missing, only to discover the loss remains. And yet Audrey forgave him. Not only that, she supported him financially for the rest of his life. What does that say about a person? It says more than words ever could. It says she was compassionate even toward the source of her own hurt. It says she understood pain without letting pain define her values. It says she carried love even where love had not been returned in the way she needed. Could that be seen as strength? As grace? As the stubborn nobility of a heart that refused to become cruel? The love she walked away from. Before and between her marriages, there was another man who may have changed the course of her life, William Holden. They met while filming Sabrina, and the connection between them was immediate. He was charmed by her. Deeply charmed. Many believed he was genuinely in love with her. He even proposed. For a moment, it must have seemed like another possibility was opening in front of her, a life where affection and companionship might finally align. But Audrey said no.
Why?
Because she wanted children, and he could not give her the future she imagined for herself. Think about what that meant. Imagine standing at the edge of love and looking not only at the man in front of you, but at the life behind the man. The house, the family, the rhythm of days, the children running through rooms. She did not simply choose romance. She chose the life she had always wanted. And that choice cost her something real. How many people can say they have loved someone enough to let them go? How many can walk away from a man they care for because another dream matters just as much? Perhaps that was one of Audrey's quietest heartbreaks. She chose her future. But did she ever fully let him go? Or does every sacrifice leave behind a trace of what might have been? The quiet life she finally found. After her second divorce, Audrey made another choice that surprised many people. She did not chase another high-profile life. She did not cling to the glare of fame. She stepped away. She moved to Switzerland and chose simplicity. A home surrounded by quiet. A garden. A slower rhythm. The kind of life where the air feels softer and the days are not measured by public applause. For the first time, she did not seem to be performing for the world. She could simply exist. No roles. No pressure. No expectation that she always had to be luminous. And then she met Robert Wolders. Their relationship was different from the ones before it. It was calm, gentle, unforced. There was no need to prove anything, no hunger for image, no struggle for control. They shared companionship in its purest form. They were never formally married, yet she referred to him as her husband because emotional truth mattered more to her than paperwork. And maybe that is a question worth sitting with. What truly defines a relationship? Is it legal status, public recognition, or the private understanding between two people who know they belong together? With him, Audrey found something she had spent much of her life seeking: peace. A new purpose beyond fame. In her later years, Audrey devoted herself to humanitarian work with UNICEF. She traveled to regions devastated by poverty, conflict, and neglect. She did not do it for headlines. She did it because she understood suffering in a way that was personal and permanent. As a child, she had known fear and hunger. She had seen what it meant for a life to be unstable. So when she looked at children in crisis, she was not seeing abstractions. She was seeing echoes of herself. Why would someone who had already given the world so much choose to give even more? Maybe because she understood that survival is not the same as healing. Maybe because she knew what it meant to be vulnerable and wanted to stand beside those who still were. Maybe because the part of her that had once needed help never disappeared, it simply learned how to become the helper. This was not about publicity. It was not about maintaining a star's image. It was about meaning. The final chapter. In 1992, Audrey was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive cancer. And yet even then, she faced it with remarkable composure. There was no dramatic collapse into despair. No performance of fear. She seemed to accept what was happening with a kind of quiet dignity that matched the rest of her life. Her only wish was to return home. And she did. Surrounded by those closest to her, she spent her final days in reflection and peace. But before the end, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The person who had shaped her life more than anyone else was not a husband. Not a lover. A final question for you. So let me ask you this. How much of who we become is shaped not by what we receive, but by what we never did? Audrey Hepburn gave love to her children, to the world, and to countless strangers in need. Perhaps she gave so much because she knew what it meant to go without. Perhaps every act of kindness was also a private answer to the ache she had carried since childhood. If this story moved you, think about this for a moment. Do our earliest losses quietly shape the way we love for the rest of our lives? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy stories that reveal the deeper truth behind iconic lives, stay tuned. The next story may surprise you even more.